Go for it.
All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Douglas Show. It wasn't quite what we were hoping for yesterday, but I thought they stood in there and went toe to toe with a team that has aspirations to go to the Super Bowl. Today, my guest, as always on Mondays, is George Carmi, and our special guest today, former Redskins defensive end Adam Carriker. Adam, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. The coach will say after a game like that there's no, moral victories in the league, Adam. But for a younger team that's kind of trying to find its way, I'm curious your thoughts from a player standpoint. Like, are there moral victories in games like that?
Yes and no. Yes, because of everything you just outlined. A young team, young quarterback, okay? Had some close wins this year. Obviously, the game the week before against the Bills, who's another team with Super Bowl aspirations, didn't exactly go phenomenal. Then you play another team that has been in the Super Bowl multiple times recently, won a Super Bowl, okay? Looked pretty good in the first half of last year's Super Bowl. Some people might think they have the best overall roster, the best O-line, a quarterback who was, in that MVP conversation a year ago. So when you bounce back and you play as well as they did, down to the end, I think you got to feel pretty good about that, especially with the young squad that's building. Now, from Ron Rivera's perspective, if I don't win, I get fired. So no, there's no moral victories. If this team builds and wins a few games and loses a few games and they do great 2 years from now, but I'm not here coaching that team, that doesn't help me. So he might view it differently because there's not a whole lot of grace as an NFL coach.
It was another odd week where the defense put up a whole lot of points, George. Is this just where we're at now? Is this where we're at with the league now, that even good defenses on a weekly basis are going to give up big plays and big points will be had? Because this is a defense that we expected we would kind of lean on. And while they've made some big plays, I don't think we've leaned on them quite the way, I don't know, that I think you and I at least thought that they would.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, I think there's definitely some context with it as well. As Adam alluded to, the Buffalo Bills are one of the best teams in the NFL, averaging about 12 wins per week, 12 wins per year. The Eagles went to the Super Bowl as well last year. There is some context that goes along with it. Granted, we gave up 30 points in 3 of the last 4 games, which is definitely concerning. But at the same time, you kind of talked about it, Doug, explosive plays. And I didn't really see that many explosive plays yesterday. There was 2. There was 2 with A.J. Brown on Emmanuel Forbes, who's a brand new corner. He's kind of new to the league. But for the most part, it was pretty suppressed. For the most part, Washington kept them to 10 points going into halftime. That's a pretty competitive game going into the third quarter. So I think that's when things kind of got lost in regard to that. Big picture, though, I am kind of I'm happy with the team. I guess my biggest concern is consistent pressure. I do want to see the defensive line getting more sacks and getting more pressure on the Eagles. But then again, it's a high scoring offense, which I do see in regard to that. On the flip side of that, though, Doug, the Eagles defense isn't necessarily something to kind of sneeze at either. They have a great defensive line. They have great cornerbacks as well. And Washington put up close to 30 points as well yesterday. So I think the league is kind of trending that direction, but I think Washington has happened to play 2 great offenses back-to-back. The Buffalo Bills are number 2 in the NFL last year in scoring. The Eagles are number 3. It kind of comes to the territory, I think.
Adam, they've built this team on the defensive line. There's plenty of people that I've heard from that say, listen, you just can't spend your resources that way. When they're humming, you can see what they try to get done. Can you still win that way in the NFL with the front 4 that gets after it and just play good defense?
Yeah, I think you can win in the trenches. The trenches might matter just a smidge. I mean, when you spend high-round draft picks, guys like Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, you got Montez Sweat, who's a pretty good player as well, Chase Young, who's finally back and healthy this year and able to do some things on the field. It's a story as old as time. Football's blocking and tackling. If you're blocking better than the other team, you're going to have holes. If you're getting blocked, you're going to have holes. If you're getting off of blocks and getting to the quarterback to where you don't have to blitz all the time, you're not going to give up as many big plays in the back end. But if you got to blitz to get to the quarterback, I mean, you're going to have more one-on-ones. Their guy's going to win sometimes. And if you miss a tackle, boom, it's an 80-yard touchdown or 50-yard touchdown pass. So games, I mean, it's a quarterback-driven league. I know that. Everybody knows that. But the trenches is probably number 2, in my opinion, offensive, defensive lines as far as what's important. A good running back can look great, with a good offensive line. A great running back can look good. Average can be subpar. A quarterback. There aren't many Peyton Mannings, Tom Brady's, who just don't need time to throw the ball. I mean, their offensive lines were never good, and it was nauseating every time we played them because you'd go against their line, you'd watch them in film, they'd be awful. You'd get there, and the ball would be gone. So unless you got a top 5 greatest quarterback of all time, your quarterback needs time to throw the ball too.
It's funny you say that. I was thinking watching the game yesterday, they were always seemingly like a half a second late. And that's, I guess that's to your point. If you're going to beat a team that relies on the defensive line, one of the ways is to get it out super fast. Adam, I'm curious, like how frustrating that is when you're exerting all that energy going forward, and then all of a sudden the ball's going behind you. It's got to be frustrating.
It's very frustrating. Like those are two of the most frustrating games I ever played in, was against Peyton and was against Tom. You knew the offensive line wasn't good. Like with Peyton, he had skill guys everywhere. Okay. Tom never quite had that same luxury all the time. I mean, he had Gronkowski and Hernandez for a while and Moss for a season and some other guys. So you knew they had skill guys, but it was like, man, I got to be able to get there fast enough, can't I? I guess not, because I never got to either one of them in time. But yeah, those are two of the top 5 best quarterbacks to ever do it. So it's kind of one of those things where if you're only rushing 4 and you can effectively get there, you got to imagine the guys in the back end can cover long enough. At least you would like to think so. Unless like I said earlier, you're having to blitz, and then you're leaving those guys on more of an island out there, which creates an issue for them.
It's interesting. The defense held up fairly well, and then it was a bad day for the rookie Forbes. But A.J. Brown's going to do that to a lot of people. I think I mentioned that the other day when the game was over and people were complaining about Forbes. And it's, for all the leeway, I guess, that the quarterback needs to have for being a rookie, Forbes was out there playing against, listen, for my money, 2 of the better receivers
I agree
in the league, George. I mean, that's going to happen to people, and he'll learn, and I think he'll get better for it. I still have been surprised that it's been St. Juice as the starter on the outside, and I like him on the outside. I like him better on the outside than in the middle. The problem is they have essentially 3 boundary corners, and they don't really want to have to bring Curl into that nickel spot all the time. And Quad Martin's not ready for it. So it'll be interesting to see how they work that balance going forward. You got me, George?
Yeah, I'm here. You were asking me that question? Yeah. I agree. I think it's definitely interesting to kind of see how things played out. All the talk today has been about how Emmanuel Forbes has, had a rough game, should we have selected Christian Gonzalez and so on and so forth? I disagree with that. I think it takes some time to assimilate to the NFL. It's his 4th NFL game. He had to cover Stephon Diggs last week, had to cover A.J. Brown this week, 2 of the best wide receivers in the top 10 in the league. It's pretty difficult. One thing we do want to see kind of his growth is that he is susceptible to double moves. Like we saw that going back to Ravens training camp. They actually mic'd him up in Baltimore, and he said that Odell Beckham ran 3 double moves on me back to back to back, and Benjamin St-Juste said they must have saw something on film. They're testing you. So it's kind of interesting because that kind of piqued my ear because we heard about that back in August, and we're seeing that now in the NFL. Week 4 up in October. I'm not going to fault him. There's definitely growing pains that go along with it. But the fact that what I like about Forbes is the fact that he's pretty active. He has 1 interception so far, 5 pass defenses. He has handled the ball twice yesterday. I mean, obviously, people are going to be hard on him. Like, hey, he can get interceptions. He should be getting interceptions. But, he could have had game-changing plays yesterday, so I'm not too hard on him. Can I throw a question to Adam? Doug, do you mind?
Yeah,
is that okay?
Yeah.
So, Adam, talking about, pass rush, I know you were an exceptional pass rush in the pros. Though the Commanders seem to have a deficit on the offensive line, specifically at tackle. How can we kind of cover that? Or what's the best way that you've seen over the years that offensive coordinators maybe hide a weaker tackle or, counteract a great pass rush going against some tougher defensive lines in the NFL? What have you seen in your career?
Well, outside of having a Peyton Manning or Tom Brady.
Yeah, a couple of those.
Yeah, a couple things you can do. You can always chip with the running back. So if he's going, you can keep him in as an extra protector, obviously, but then he's not going out on the route. So if you want him to do both, on his way out, he can just, if there's one stronger pass rusher to the left or the right, you can have him going on the route that way. Bam, and He does what's a chip block. He bangs his shoulder into the defensive end, outside linebacker, whoever's coming on the edge, and then he goes out on his route. You can have a tight end do the same thing. A lot of times, if a tight end lines up off the line of scrimmage, okay, the defensive end will usually line up inside of him closer to the tackle, and then the tight end can kind of do the same thing, almost like a bang and go or whatever you want to do, whatever route he's doing. You can obviously keep those guys in extra as well. The offensive line, and they do this every time anyways, they're sliding the protection right or left. They're really, really tricky with their calls. It's usually Roger Larry. I have no idea what that could possibly mean, right and left. But they walk up to the line. They'll call out the mic. They'll do Roger Larry, which tells you where they're sliding half the time, if they weren't already looking or leaning that way. So you can slide to where you think the blitz is going, which is what 95% of teams want to do. You can slide to where the stronger pass rusher is. You can chip with the tight end, chip with the back. Chip with different things. You can do different things like that. Obviously, you can keep extra guys in as well. So there's multiple options, things you can do. You can try to get the ball out quick, throw in a cut block here or there. That always keeps the defensive end a little bit more honest. Nobody likes big 330-pound linemen flying at their knees. Yeah. So there's different things you can do.
Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Adam, I know that you do a ton of college football now, so I'm sure that you've seen a bit of Sam Howell. What did you think about him in college, and what do you like about him so far?
He's a guy I thought kind of flew under the radar a little bit, and I know he was talked about coming out in the draft, but he was a guy that I was like, man, if you watch him, he's got some sneaky things that he does. He's probably not going to be maybe originally brought in as a starter with most teams, but I could see him within a year or two or a couple of years, especially if a guy gets banged up or somebody goes somewhere else. Hey, this is a guy that could surprise some people. So he was a guy that was interesting coming out of college. I kind of wanted to keep my eye on him specifically anyways, because he's got some sneaky skills and sneaky things. And, if you kind of think back, not exactly like Russell Wilson coming out, but Russell Wilson surprised some people. Who was the quarterback that the Seahawks had signed? He was from LSU. I forget his name.
Matt Flynn, right? Was it Matt Flynn?
Some big fancy contract. I don't think he ever started a game, because here comes this, fourth, fifth rounder, Russell Wilson, and this guy who's too short, this and that, and all he's done is had a great career. And I know Broncos fans might not be happy with me right now, but that's a topic for another day. I kind of see him a little bit like that. Who knows if he'll go to the Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl, do those types of things like Russell has. But he's just a guy I wanted to keep my eye on. He's some similarities and just kind of sneaky good qualities.
He's on a historic pace for sacks. I wonder, what does he need the most to clean up? Because the more that I watch these things, it's really as poorly as some of the offensive line plays been, he's held the ball for a long time. Is that just getting used to the speed of the game, or is that something that he can see in film and is that just a repetition thing?
I think it's a reps thing. It's a little bit of everything, because sometimes the quarterback can sometimes be responsible for the unblocked guy. In other words, like a defense can bring more guys than you can block, okay? Because the quarterback technically can't block anybody. So if you kept all 10 guys into block, the defense can still bring 11. And that's obviously never going to happen, but just as an example. So the quarterback can become responsible for the unblocked guy. If you're chipping or things of that nature, or you are or are not, everybody slides their protection one way or the other. You got to make that quick read. There's going to be somebody who's going to be open quick, and you got to be able to read that and figure it out, because then all of a sudden they drop, and then you got to be able to read that so you don't throw the pick six. And, it's all a part of being comfortable with the offense. Being timing with your receivers, your tight ends, with everybody is important, and then being able to make that quick, proper read. The pre-snap is huge. Defenders, they try to disguise things, but usually with about 8 or less seconds on the clock, they're going to get in position to do their job. And so with about 8 or less seconds on the clock is usually when most of the pre-snap reads tend to happen. But obviously, you're kind of winding down, which is why the defense waits. You got to get good at reading those things quickly. Like anytime, going back to Peyton, we would just stand there. And when 8 seconds hit the clock, then we'd get in our defense, because otherwise he was going to dissect you anyways. But he was definitely going to dissect you if you gave him too much time. So we would legit just stand there on defense. And then with 8 seconds, we'd get where we were supposed to go before the snap.
Adam, quick question to that. So you want to think the NFL is very complex and very nuanced in regard to the defensive calls, but for the most part, is it pretty much like a pretty standard game, like cover 2, cover 3? Like, is it pretty common for a quarterback to diagnose a defense, or is that like a 50-50 shot? Like how easy or hard is it to kind of figure that out? Or is that the $1 million question? What's going on there?
Man, I think it's universally kind of agreed upon by most people that I know anyways. The two hardest things to do in pro sports. Number one is play quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
If you think about it, there's 8 billion people on planet Earth. On any given Sunday, there's only 32 guys starting in the NFL at quarterback. I'm just going to say it. They're only about half of them are considered decent.
Yeah,
and only about half of them are considered elite. So you've got anywhere from 8 to 12 guys walking the face of planet Earth who are considered really good quarterbacks. And that's it. I've played with guys. I can throw the ball quarter mile back in '82. You know, not just Napoleon Dynamite, but the real life versions of Uncle Rico.
Uncle Rico, love it.
Yes, but they couldn't throw it to a guy 5 yards away from him, just standing there with nobody blitzing and no defensive back. Like, there's so much that goes into playing quarterback, and most of it's right here.
Yeah.
The other thing is trying to hit a Major League Baseball. That's the second toughest thing.
I agree.
And Deion Sanders will tell you that thing will do some funny things. So those are the two toughest things.
Gotcha.
Funny about Deion, right? Because I would imagine the third hardest is playing corner when you're constantly running backwards. Amazing what he was doing. I ran a poll on Twitter about the 2 minutes.
Doug, you still there?
I think you froze. Can you hear me, George?
Yeah, I can hear you. Let me see what poll he's talking about really quickly. Well, I guess while we have some downtime, are you more into college football, Adam, or do you watch more pro football on a typical basis? Like, how often do you follow the NFL now, or do you kind of like want a little bit of a break now that you kind of are stepping away from the game?
So I grew up watching college football because my dad grew up in a small family farm, Giltner, Nebraska, small town. So he grew up a big Nebraska fan. So pretty much how good or bad I was during the week was honestly dependent, not now, because Nebraska always loses, unfortunately, but back then on whether Nebraska won or lost the game. If Nebraska won, you know, I could be a normal kid. If Nebraska lost, I was walking on eggshells filled with broken glass. So I grew up watching college football. I immensely enjoyed it. I would start paying attention to the NFL come back then, week 17, now what would be week 18, when games really started to matter, and then watch the playoffs. Obviously, when I played, that was different, especially in the NFL. But I don't know, I just find myself drawn to the college game just a little bit more. I mean, when you watch the Giants go 9-7 twice and then end up with a Super Bowl championship, and the Patriots 15-0 one year, how important is the regular season really? Yeah. So that's kind of the tiebreaker for me. But, you know, I definitely, probably the team I watch more than anybody else is the Commanders for obvious reasons.
Okay. And I guess, what are your initial thoughts so far? Are you a fan of Eric Bieniemy? Are you a fan of Ron Rivera? Do you have are you confident in their play calling? How do you feel about all that?
Man, Eric Bieniemy, that was kind of the big question coming into this year. Is he really a good offensive coordinator, or was it just Patrick Mahomes and all the weapons he had there? I think he's done pretty good so far. They've obviously I think they're 2-2 at the moment. They've been putting up a decent amount of points. Hopefully the defense can allow a little bit less, but the league is such an offense-driven league. They're not going to change a rule to help the defense. They want more butts in the seats, and butts in the seats want to see points. So it's going to get harder and harder to play good defense because that's the way the NFL wants it. So,
gotcha. What's up, Doug? You hear us?
Yeah. Sorry about that. It was off the internet, modern technology, and all. I don't know if you guys had talked about. I was getting ready to talk about the 2 point. Going to win the game there. Over 800 people on Twitter took a poll the other day that ran, and about 75% of those people say go for it and win the game. I was just curious from both of your perspectives. George, we could start with you. Like, did you like going to overtime, or would you have rather just gone for it right then and tried to knock them out?
So I might be the minority here because I've been listening to sports radio all day long, and everyone says go for it, go for 2. But I think there is like a human element to the game. And I think Ron Rivera was reading his players. He even said during his press conference, he was like, hey, they look gassed, they look tired. I don't know if they were ready for the actual play. You can criticize him for that, but it just seemed like they kind of stretched their limits to tie the game up. And I thought that, like, hey, if they had a timeout, they actually ran out. I don't know if you guys remember, but they actually did not have any timeouts left. So they basically had to turn around in 40 seconds and basically run a 2-point conversion play. Logan Paulson is very intuitive, very sharp guy. I heard him earlier today. he was like, you know what? Maybe Eric Bieniemy already called his favorite 2-point play, earlier in the game. I think Curtis Samuel had a great kind of a sneak sweep. He scored a touchdown on that earlier in the game. Maybe he didn't necessarily have one in his back pocket right then and there. Maybe they weren't ready for the play. So for me, the defense, they were kind of off and on all day long, but the offense was kind of humming. And if you can hold the Eagles to one field goal and potentially score a touchdown, I wasn't mad. I can see both sides of the coin, but Washington had them where they wanted them. They got the ball first. They had the opportunity to win the game in the overtime, and it just didn't work out. So you question them there. You can question for not making the 2-point conversion. It's very easy to be a couch quarterback, But curious, what do you guys think?
And Adam, the numbers and the percentage. I don't know where you are on the numbers, but statistically and percentages wise, probabilities wise, it says you got a much better chance to run that play, hit it effectively, and win than to drive 75 yards down the field again and score a touchdown. That's just what the numbers say, but I'm still curious where you stand on it.
I think George made some great points because I think every situation is different. Do you have the momentum? How has your team looked in the fourth quarter? Which team has looked stronger? Which team looks gassed? Do you feel you're the better team? If you're the better team, you want to play longer. If you're the not as good a team, you want to cut the game short as much as possible. All those factors kind of come into it. Logan, I played with Logan. He was a tight end when I was there. Okay, I don't know if he's still got the ponytail and all that stuff, but he was always highly intelligent. He makes a great point, because as a guy who's coached in my own right, kids, 8th grade, high school, whatnot, but it's like sometimes you've already called your best play. You might have it, you might not. And it might work once, but it might not work twice. Or they may have adjusted to it and you don't want to run it again. And you may or may not have that. So there's so many factors that go into it. And as always, hindsight is 20/20, because if you go for it and don't make it, well, why didn't you go to overtime? You might have got the ball first, so hindsight's always 20/20.
I had a million of those in the comments, right? It was like, well, yeah, sure, of course now, because it didn't work. But if if they go for it, it doesn't work, then half the people are still upset about it. Adam, how have you found the job that Ron's done so far?
Can you give me 1 second? My computer's literally going to die. I'm going to plug it in. I'll be right back.
Very good. It was George. It was a wild game.
It was a wild game.
They stood toe to toe and threw haymakers with one of the better teams in the league. And I tweeted that, if they can do that every week, and just go out there and be a competitive, complementary football type of team, they should be able to, at least the next 4 or 5 games should be in each one of them. Oddly weird day for Tress Way yesterday.
It was, but I'm not going to fault him because he's been consistent throughout his entire career. I mean, obviously, I don't want to say father time. He's been our punter for a very long time, so maybe there is some potential regression upcoming, but I don't see anything an issue with him there. In regard to the game, before we throw it back to Adam, I thought that walking away from game 3, we're like, is Eric Bieniemy, how's his offensive flow and his game calling? Is it going to work against some of the better teams in the league? Sam Howell had a really poor game in week 3, 4 interceptions, 9 sacks. How is he going to bounce back? And if you kind of look at like what you were hoping to see in week 4, you saw it, right? You saw Sam Howell play more composed. He had no turnovers against a really good defense. He had a couple hundred yards passing. He was elusive on third down. Eric Bieniemy he had more of a balanced game. I think he manufactured touches for Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin, got them involved in the game early on, which I appreciated. And he also stuck with Brian Robinson. And Brian Robinson didn't necessarily have big gains. I think he had like 35 yards when it was all said and done. But he basically just kept with it, 14 carries, just chopping wood. And he basically broke him for a touchdown and scored a touchdown in the game. So I like the balance. I do agree with what Adam said. Like, I think, even though it's a flashy game, there's a lot of scoring, it goes back to blocking and playing offensive line and playing defensive line. If you can out-muscle someone and kind of inflict your will on people, they're going to crack eventually. So I did like how the game turned out yesterday. It was a good game.
And I was actually fairly impressed by, say what you will about the offensive line for the Commanders, and it was not a very good game for Wiley statistically, but it didn't feel like that Philly defensive line wrecked the game, right? Like, I really expected that if things went south, it'd be because those 3 behemoths they have in the front of that defensive line just completely destroyed us. And it didn't go that way. I was very surprised by that. Were you, Adam?
Yeah. Well, when you compared to how it went the week before, you would have absolutely had someone said, hey, this is how it's going to go. You'd be like, yeah, I'll take that. That works for me. So it's one of those things where it's a younger team. You want to see improvement. You want to see progression. You want to see how Eric Bieniemy does now that he's in a different situation. And, you saw drastic improvements. I don't know if the Eagles are better. You can make an argument that they're better, but against two of the best teams in the league when it comes to the Bills and the Eagles, again, two teams with Super Bowl aspirations, and they're very, very real aspirations. So I think most Commanders fans, nobody's thrilled with the win, but I think when you compare week 3 to week 4, I think you got to feel pretty decent about how it looked a lot better.
Can I throw a question, Adam?
Go ahead, George.
So, Adam, I definitely respect, obviously, your pass rush abilities and what you did on the pros. Tell me about this, right? I know our defensive line did generate pressure, and we're starting to see pressure from Sweat and Chase Young, but occasionally, they're not getting to the quarterback. I don't know how often, how nuanced and how detailed you watch the game. Is there a deficit that you see in their game, or is there anything you would like to see improvement on, or I don't know if you feel comfortable touching on that?
You guys you'd have a hard time finding a more talented defensive line in the NFL. You really would.
I agree, 100%.
High round picks, a lot of talent, a lot of ability. I always look back at myself and I'm like, man, I did this good, but I could have done that better.
Yeah.
When I meet other people and they just start talking about all the good things that they've accomplished in their life, in the back of my mind, I can't help but think you're not a real competitor, because even for me, I'm done. I can't go back and change anything. I can't go back and win anything. But there's times when I'm like, I wish I'd have done this different. Or I'm more obsessed. I don't know if obsessed the right word, but I tend to think more about the things I didn't accomplish than the things I did. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's just kind of what a competitor is. So if you look at these guys, I'm sure they're true competitors. Honestly, they should probably be getting to the quarterback even more because they have that ability. They have that talent. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's almost insane what the Commanders have up front right now. And so a lot of it's that getting the hands off, getting low, getting around the corner, just those little things. Sometimes when guys have really freakish natural ability, they tend to rely on it, and the technique isn't always quite as good. Gotcha. Okay, so you got to be able to blend the technique, the hands, the low pad level, dipping and ripping and countering, and it's just a relentless on fire effort that never ends. And you look at JJ Watt, look how freakish he was, and barring injuries at the end of his career, his effort and his technique and the way he played, he was strong, but he played stronger than he even was. Mm-hmm. And he played faster than he even was. And if you watch his technique and his effort, a lot of it came off of that. And I'm not saying these guys are being lazy or anything like that. Yeah. For me, it's more about those little technical type deals that I feel like they could improve on.
Gotcha. Thank you.
When you got to the Redskins, were they already in the 34? Did they switch when you got here? I was trying to remember that earlier today.
I went through the whole Albert Hainsworth, let's go from the 4-3 to 3-4 debacle. That was awesome.
I thought so.
Yeah.
But you ended up, did you prefer playing the edge in Washington compared to, did they have you in tackle in St. Louis?
So actually in St. Louis, they moved me to nose guard. I will never forget my pre-draft visit. Brian Baker, the D-line coach, pulled me aside and he goes, we've got Leonard Little, we got James Hall, we got Leroy Glover. Okay, those are our 2 ends and our 3 technique. We're short at the nose tackle. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of stared at him like, okay, what do you want from me? I'm not a nose tackle. And he sits me down and he goes, what if you were that guy? Points to the nose tackle. And I was like, so I was raised, you do whatever the team asks you to do. Okay. And so I said, yes, not really taking him serious. I'm like, it's 1 in 32 odds. They're going to draft me here. Who knows if they'd actually do it? Maybe he's just testing me. Are you a team player or not? So, of course, they draft me. They put me in nose guard. I was the tallest and lightest nose guard in the league at 6'6", 292. So I played most of my time there as a nose guard. I think I had 2 starts at a 3 technique when Glove got banged up a little bit a couple times. I preferred DC because even as a 3-4 end, it's not designed for you to make plays. It's designed for you to build a wall, and then the linebackers make all the plays. But there was just a little bit more freedom than being a nose guard in a 4-3, and that's just part of the job description. But I probably enjoyed the 3-4 end just a little bit more because of that.
Do you like the defense that they're running in Washington now with Jack Del Rio?
I would like it if they got to the quarterback more.
Me too.
I think we all would.
But like I said, it's an offensive-driven league. And so that's the challenge that every defensive coordinator faces. So they got to find a way to get the quarterback more. They just do. You got too much talent, too much ability up front. You got to get there more often. And everything will literally revolve around that defensively, which then affects, if the other team can't move the ball, your offense gets more possessions. Each team had the ball exactly 10 times last Sunday. You got to steal possessions here and there. You're going to get strip sacks. You're going to get sack fumbles. It's going to lead to picks, short fields for your offense. Like literally, I don't want to say everything revolves around getting to the quarterback, but pretty much everything revolves around getting to the quarterback and protecting the quarterback, which is why pass rushers and tackles are considered so valuable in the NFL now.
Adam, should they be blitzing more? I feel like they kind of like rely on their front four and kind of drop back in a more of like a zone coverage. But I've seen counter arguments where like the league is so fast and they have like quick passes and kind of can get over the defensive line. They might exploit the blitz. How do you feel about that?
I think that's kind of what I was saying. You got the too much talent, too many good players up front. They should be able to get there without having to blitz as much. So you got to address why it isn't happening as much. I think they had 3 sacks on Sunday, if I'm correct on that. So
Yep.
You got to mix in the blitz, obviously, but then you leave yourself susceptible in the back end. You leave yourself susceptible to screens. You got to mix it in to keep teams balanced. And there's different types of blitzes. There's pass blitzes where you're just trying to get to the quarterback and you're not really worried about integrity in your gaps in the rush game. And then you got run blitzes where you got every gap accounted for. So for me, I think they just got to find a way to get to the quarterback more, whatever that may mean. And a lot of times it's down and distance. A lot of times that first down dictates how long second down is, which dictates, do I got to play the run first? Do I got to be balanced? Can we go nickel? Can we come off the ball in a more aggressive manner if it's 2nd 8 versus 2nd 4? So you got to get an early down successful type situation. So 2nd and 3rd down honestly become more predictable. And you don't have to worry about every rush lane, the running the ball, every lane being accounted for, every gap being accounted for. And you can worry about more getting off the quarterback because if you give up an extra couple yards on a random run, you're not as worried about it. So I think that first down, success or lack thereof, would have a big impact as well.
Makes sense.
How fluky is, like last year, the Commanders were like, I think top 10 in 3rd down efficiency. Maybe they were in the top 5. And this year, like they're in the bottom 20. How fluky is that 3rd down stat, Adam?
A lot of that is predicated on how you're getting to the quarterback. A lot of that is predicated on how 1st and 2nd down go. Again, 3rd and 3 obviously is a lot more challenging for the defense than 3rd and 7. So I kind of come back to some of those similar things from before and just trying to improve on those particular areas.
I want to take just a couple minutes before we get out of here and ask a couple college questions. Your thoughts on NIL and how it will do you see it affecting drafts? Can guys that are now making $6-7 million in college say, I don't like the way the top of the draft is shaking out, I'll wait? Do you think that will become a problem, or maybe that's a bit overblown?
Well, it depends on your perspective. If you're the NFL, it can become a problem. If you're college football, you think it's great.
Yeah.
Like what Deion Sanders came out 2-3 weeks ago and said Shadur's not going pro next year. Well, when he's making $5-6 million in NIL, why wouldn't you stay and play for your dad and a team that appears to be building something anyways, for another year? Because you're never going to get to do that again. And he's never played for anyone else except for his dad, Shadur. So as far as NIL in general, it's that conundrum that I've been asked about a million times. Universities, conferences, programs, they're making hundreds of millions of dollars off the backs of these kids and a scholarship is absolutely worth a lot, but it wasn't equivalent to the money being brought in. So how do you figure that out yet keep them amateurs? So NIL is kind of this fraudulent system of the NCAA is not paying players, but we're still going to pay them. So they're still amateurs, but we all know it's a bunch of BS and they're really semi-pro football players at this point.
Yeah.
So it's that conundrum where I don't know how you do both. You either had to say you're amateurs and you're not getting paid, or we're going to pretend you're amateurs, I guess, even though everyone knows you're semi-pro and we're going to pay you. So that's the route the NCAA has gone. And eventually they were going to go there. We all kind of knew that. It's just how are they going to try to figure it out? I don't have a whole lot of respect for the NCAA. So, of course, they found this random roundabout way to try to go around it. So NIL itself, it's turned it into and the transfer portal, like you legit have free agency in college football.
Well, I was going to say,
Wow.
I've had a bunch of people that are around the game that tell me that it's not as far as coaches are concerned, the transfer portal is a bigger deal than NIL because the coaches don't concern themselves with the money anyway. It's that transfer portal. It's a much bigger deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, the boosters and everyone else in the university is kind of helping with NIL. The coaches are more concerned in free agency, aka the transfer
Right.
portal.
It's crazy.
And a lot of times, I mean, high school recruiting is still important, but when kids are flip-flopping all the time until the name's on the dotted line and then they transfer after year one, or there was a kid that went from Michigan to Colorado and left by the end of January, went somewhere else. And there's a kid who left Nebraska, Luke McCaffrey. He was literally at Louisville for a week. Then he went to SMU. He was there for a week. Like, what the hell? So it's kind of one of those things where I think the transfer portal is more important because you can get immediate impact players. Whereas high school kids, even if they're for a year, they might be gone year 2. If they're there for 2, they might be gone year 3. So.
Just incredible. Tell us a little bit about the Carriker Chronicles, when it comes on, and how we can find it.
Yeah, so I have 3 things that I do. One of them, 93.7 The Ticket. It's a radio station in Lincoln. But the main 2 that you'll find online are the Carriker Chronicles, 95% Nebraska football. So I have a YouTube channel. You can also go to carrikerchronicles.com. And I was also asked to do what we call the Big Ten show. Take that, the Ohio State. Okay. So we're not a Big Ten show. We're the Big Ten show. And that's all. Honestly, you can find that at carrikerchronicles.com as well. So I got a YouTube page for the Carriker Chronicles, and pretty much everything else is carrikerchronicles.com 4 or 5 days a week.
We appreciate the time today, buddy. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. I
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Thanks, fellas.
Okay.
Bye.